I think we would come up with a definition for habitat would be more suitable, and then define habitat as being woodlands, meadows. I think that's what Michael's getting at.
Yeah, that phrase on page 8 about private ownership, phrase that means agriculture, habitat, or forest resources, that's straight out of the state law.
Right,
and if it is vague, it's because the state law is vague.
You can define habitat.
And I don't want to be vague anymore. I think, you know, one of the biggest problems that I had is the disappearance of the vistas in Beavertail. When that was federal land, it was all mowed, and everybody that drove down Beavertail Road could see the ocean on both sides.
I agree.
Now you cannot see
changing this will do that though, because this is really just talking about an ownership form, and if it's saying that
a lot of times the deed restrictions are such. I know they are in West Reach, that I can't cut down anything with a circumference of with a diameter more than 6 inches. And I think that has a lot to do with the disappearance of the meadows in Jamestown. It costs money to maintain a meadow. It doesn't cost money to maintain a woodlot.
Lisa, can we just add a definition of habitat?
what would it be?
It's easy. I would come up with that. No, it's easy to come up with a definition. Yeah, that's an all scientific.
Will you do that?
There's easy to come up with a definition, which would cover everything Michael says.
Use
I think that's, because I find that kind of awkward too, because forests are habitat. Even though it's straight out of the state, we can define habitat ourselves.
But Mike, your point about meadows being overgrown and not preserved, when we review the subdivision regulations, there'll be sections in there about the open space use and management plan. Okay, management and maintenance are very important when you talk about open space.
Yeah.
So you, as a planning commission member, can say, all right, you're saving this meadow, but you also have the right, or maybe even the obligation, to clear cut it back every X number of years to maintain it as a meadow. So that's...
And that's my contention, is that a lot of the meadows have disappeared in Jamestown, and their disappearance is being aided and abetted by the deed restriction language in both our ordinances and in the deed restriction of the owners. If we wanted to roll the clock back 50 years, none of these woods would be here, or at least the majority of them would not be here. This is all new growth.
Over 100 years would be all woods.
No, literally, the Indians burned it too.
So
That's why the code was what?
if we get a comprehensive description of what habitat is, that leaves it open to meadows,
Right.
etc.
I want to recognize the fact that, you know, the history of Jamestown was it was a meadow. That's why Newport Columns was, because it was a meadow, because the Indians burned it every year.
Okay. Do you have any other?
No.
There?
I could die happy.
The only thing, and we can't resolve it tonight, but, you know, you come up with second draft, and obviously on page 5, where we're defining applicability, that's where we define the mandatory versus voluntary stuff. We're obviously not going to solve that tonight, but just for clarification, you've got a paragraph A that says may allow proposed, and I like the may allow proposed. And then the notes in the box, those are the options we have to put into paragraph A. Is that what you're saying? Is that what the notes are? Whatever our final decision is, they would replace paragraph A.
I'm not sure I quite follow that.
Page 5.
Page 5, for paragraph A says the planning commission may allow a proposed lot development project to subdivision to be developed as a form of conservation development. I like those words, may be allowed. It doesn't make it mandatory. So I'm fine with A. But the notes then seem to be giving us options later on. And I'm wondering, are we supposed to be deciding to replace A with one of the two things of me?
Yes. Yes.
And that's the decision we've got to make at some point in the future here after we get to them. Okay.
Yeah, that highlighted box is simply to alert you that a decision needs to be made on this page.
And the other thing I would like up for grabs for future decision is on page 8. The table 2, R200, I'm not comfortable with 70 and 60%, but I know other people love it, so we're not going to decide that tonight, but I'd like that to be a question mark at this point, as opposed to be guesses and on free.
That table 2 is like 60%.
70%.
70% seems like an awful lot.
And that's the land that's.
So I think the only reason that that's achievable is because the lot sizes are smaller.
Yeah, my problem with that is, first of all, if you have a large lot, then you get, of that lot, you take out all the unsuitable land, which may be half the lot. And then of the 50% left, 70% of that has to be preserved on top of it. So now you're down to about 10% of the lot.
Yeah, they're going to take all those houses, put them in one place and put them on levels and put them on.
Well, you have to discount the unsuitable land anyway, even on a conventional development. I understand that, but now you're taking a 10-acre lot, you may only have 1 acre now that's developable because you're on conservation, because you got to preserve 70% of the usable land as opposed to. So I'm not comfortable with, you can't count the unsuitable as part of it. I understand the logic why you can, but that 70% really then potentially drives it to being almost an unusable lot, period.
And I have a comment about that. I have another comment about that, and which I have written down, is that I agree, I like the concept of having the open space all usable, but I know Chris thinks that wetlands are awfully valuable. And so my question in my mind when I read that was, are we encouraging them to not put the wetlands in the open space and not put the coastal features in the open space, but to make them as part of the lots where they're less protected? So I think that I understand the point of not allowing them to be counted as a developable area, but maybe there should be a provision that allows some or encourages them at least to go into the open space.
I just think that can't be as clear cut as that. That needs more discussion.
I agree, there should be a hybrid to this. A hybrid, I don't know, there's one.
Because right now we allow 50%.
There is a hybrid, okay.
Yes, little comp,
Okay, little copy would be good.
that is as hybrid as you can get.
Okay, because I agree, if you take 70% of the usable land, after you've already protected all the non-usable land, you may have a lot.
Yeah.
So we want to think about.
Especially in Jamestown.
Hey, answer your question.
No, do you have any comments?
Oh, Richard first.
No, I've seen a few, I've listened to everyone.
Okay. Do you have any more input for?
No, I think we can come up with a good definition, because I agree with Michael, that needs to be defined better.
And you have
that, and talk some of the small changes.
Conservation. Okay. I think what would be helpful, and it may be that we see it in the Miller presentation, and maybe we have to generate it ourselves, but it would be helpful to model some of these conditions. As Barry is pointing out, what really happens on a typical lot, if you're in the 200 zone and you start chopping it up with a certain percentage of wetlands, is it what we really want? And it may be that when we look at the model, it is what we want, that we don't want to have that level of density in any of these locations. That's something that needs to be discussed, but I think it's difficult to discuss without having kind of a graphic model. It's the same kind of problem we had when we were trying to discuss the multifamily issues and what the permissible lot sizes should be for multifamily, the permissible frontages, and what does that generate for lot dimensions and configurations and so on. These are all things that we need to look at, because as you've heard everybody here say, it generates a character. And overall, one of the basic founding principles that we're talking about here is the character of this island, the character of the town. We need to understand what we're really saying with these words graphically. What are we really doing? So I think it would be very helpful if we could have some models. Maybe there are some that you already know about that you can refer us to, or some that we can just get copies of that help us out.
Scott's presentation without that.
There are models, maps, drawings, plans, and subdivisions that have been designed. Unfortunately, the history of conservation development in Rhode Island is very recent. So not too many examples that you can find driving around within an hour's distance of Jamestown. But Scott Millar has a library full of plans and drawings and slides that he can share with you, if that would be helpful.
I think that should be something we do parallel with existing
I also suggest that, and maybe you were just going to do this. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, right?
I was going to say, since we didn't get through the subdivision